And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining our platform today from across the Louisiana plain, where we are advancing the cause of constitutional conservatism, elevating good, young, vibrant candidates running for office, and slowly but surely, day by day, measure by measure, draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. Welcome, 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 good people of Louisiana. We are thrilled that you are spending part of your day with us. It means the world to us. We could not do this without your encouragement, your prayers, and your financial support. If you are looking for a way to support us, advertise with us, or even just send us feedback, please visit our website at freedomstate.us. We would love to hear from you. We seem to be speeding ever faster toward Election Day, which, as we all know, is October 14th. Just a reminder that early voting begins on September 30th, but we, along with our election integrity experts, Louisiana-based election integrity experts like Dr. Randy Russ and our endorsed Secretary of State candidate Brandon Trosclair, are strongly encouraging Election Day in-person voting. So please make a plan to vote in person on Election Day. With that at the front of our minds, we are continuing the endorsement series. We hope that you are enjoying it. We hope that you're sharing episodes with friends and family members who live in the districts that we're covering, because we know that each and every candidate will affect the direction and the future of our state. So as a reminder, you can send them short, powerful clips of our candidates from our YouTube and Rumble channels, which are on the website. They're also in the show notes. So today we have with us a businessman, a true constitutional conservative, and frankly, a breath of fresh air. Stephen Swiber, who's running for State Senate in District 21, is joining us today, and we'll get to meet him shortly. But first, I will read for us the scripture of the day. And it's Hebrews chapter 11, verses 30 to 34. And it says, "Faith pulled down Jericho's walls after the people marched around them for 7 days. Faith provided a way of escape for Rahab the prostitute, avoiding the destruction of unbelievers because she received the Hebrew spies in peace. And what more could I say to convince you? For there is not enough time to tell you of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. Through faith's power, they conquered kingdoms and established true justice. Their faith fastened onto their promises and pulled them into reality. It was faith that shut the mouth of lions, put out the power of raging fire, and caused many to escape certain death by the sword. Although weak, their faith imparted power to make them strong. Faith sparked courage within them, and they became mighty warriors in battle, pulling armies from another realm into battle array." I just think that's such a powerful and just life-infusing scripture. I think we're at a really critical moment in history, and people who love the truth know that. You can sense it in the atmosphere. We're in a time where immovable faith is required, where our belief that the Lord will come through for us, that he will do what he said he will do, actually pulls it into reality. So let me encourage you today to recount the faithfulness of the Lord in your life. Read and reread Hebrews 11 and do what the early church did. Build yourself up in your most holy faith. Do what David taught us and strengthen yourself in the Lord. These are days where our faith in the Lord needs to be more real than anything that we can see, taste, or touch, because it is what will bring us safely through to the other side of this very, very tumultuous spiritual war that we're in.
Indeed, it will bring us to the other side. And one of the things that jumped out at me, Danielle, in your prayer was the phrase "faith sparks courage." And it is faith that gives us the courage to do things and to act in certain ways that maybe our fear would direct us to do something very different. But faith does indeed spark courage and courageous acts. And speaking of an act of courage, and really putting himself out there for the people to run for public office here against an entrenched machine is Stephen Swiber. I had a chance to meet Stephen several weeks ago at the GOP convention, was very impressed and very privileged to have him on the State of Freedom this morning. Stephen, how are you, my friend?
Great, Chris and Danielle. I'm so happy to be here. How are y'all today?
Fantastic.
I do want to speak on that scripture because it was so powerful, and especially the part about the faithful tearing down kingdoms. I think that actually reminded me of the founding of the United States, because not only did they go up against the ultimate entrenched machine, which was hereditary monarchy that had been around since the fall of the Roman Empire, they also did it based on the very Christian value, right, that we are all equal because we are all created in God's image.
Yeah.
A lot of people kind of forget that started with Christianity and it culminated itself into the founding of the United States. And that's really the fundamental concept of why we succeeded thus far, because we believe in the individual, we believe in the dignity of every person, and that every person needs equal protection under the rule of law because we are all created by God. And so that struck me when you read that.
That's very, very profound, Stephen. It's interesting that people forget that you're exactly right. It was with the advent of Christianity that we began to view one another as all intrinsically equal before God. And then it was the foundational Christian philosophy that I think informed our own government. Our founding fathers were intellectual and moral revolutionaries. As you said, for the first time, hereditary monarchy was questioned. The notion of the divine right of kings was questioned. And our founding fathers said, absolutely not. We are all intrinsically equal in the eyes of God and all created equal. And it is a very important reminder that you make that this experiment in representative government was revolutionary and brought about by young revolutionaries in 1776. That's such a great point that you make. But Stephen, let me ask you this. Tell the listeners, since you haven't been on the show before, a little about your background. I know you're running down there in Senate District 21, which is St. Mary, Terrebonne, Iberia, and Lafourche. I don't know if it's all of those parishes, but that's where you're running. What made you decide to run, and what were some of your experiences that led up to this decision?
Absolutely. Well, yes, you had it exactly right. We do have all of St. Mary, and then we have portions of Iberia, Lafourche, Terrebonne, Assumption, and St. Martin. So these Senate districts are actually kind of broad, and since I've been campaigning, I think I put a lot of. Well, I had to replace my tires last week because they were getting bald.
I know it didn't have anything to do with the potholes out there.
Oh my goodness, the roads are absolutely terrible unless it's the road outside of a political incumbent's houses, which we'll get to some of that in a moment, because that's one of the things that definitely led me to run for office. We have these awful roads and out-of-date bridges, but if you drive by the state legislator's house, he's got the nicest stretch of highway in the entire state. No, so for the listeners, I'm Stephen Swiber. I'm originally from Morgan City. Now I've set down roots in Gibson, Louisiana. I'm a product of public high school, a son of a math teacher in Berwick, Louisiana. I went off to Tulane to get my degree in political economy with a specialization in law, economics, and public policy, and a master's in management and energy. I've come back to take over a family business. We are in the oil and gas support space, offshore, probably between 60 and 90 employees at a time. So for the past several years, I've been engaged with that. I'm an ardent conservationist. I serve in some organizations such as the Land Trust for Louisiana that do a lot of great conservation work around the state. I sit on the board of a local community bank and some community organizations like St. Mary Excel and the Atchafalaya Intercoastal Coalition. So I've been readily engaging in business, trying to navigate the really, really rough waters of an industry that has been down and then that has been kicked by our own federal government. They really have not done us any favors, even as oil comes up and up. Hopefully, they will reap what they sow when it comes to a gas price crisis right there in the presidential election year, because I think that's where we're headed with the Biden administration's policies. But along the way, when it comes to my advocacy, when it comes to my service around the community, I've started to notice a lot of problems that we have And of course, I went to some of our legislators and senators, and I do have a great legislator over here, Beryl Amity.
She's one of our
she is a
favorites.
true public servant, but I noticed that she runs into these barriers that were put up by the leadership and by the governor.
Yeah.
And as I follow the legislature, I just noticed that the Senate side really ambushes a lot of good things that come from the House side, and the governor wields so much power. And so I want to talk today about, but this is something that's also a theme of my campaign and why I decided to run. It's not just the little things. We do have a lot of little things to change, such as our tax structure, our really high tax rates, a lot of our regulatory state. But when you start to add them all up, and it comes back to the structural problems we have in our government that feeds a lot of these other fires. And if we don't have an appetite for transformational change, we're not going to get anywhere. And the results speak for themselves. I mean, people are fleeing blue states on the coast and places up north and coming to the South in droves, whether that's individual workers or employers. And they're coming to Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Georgia, Tennessee. And yet Louisiana is up there with Illinois, California, and New York as an out-migration state. But we're surrounded by net in-migration states, and it has nothing. They're definitely not coming here because the food is bad or because the people are unfriendly. They're coming here because we don't seem to have the right policies, and we're definitely we're feeding the degradation of our own communities here, and it's a real shame. And that's why I feel compelled to try to get there in the state Senate and see if we can't have that appetite to really change what's wrong.
Well, Stephen, I think that you're 100% on point with that, and I just have these visions of structural change that need to happen as well. I just think that the system is set up basically to run us into the ground. And I think that's exactly what you're seeing. And you're talking about the degradation of our state. I can see clearly that you are going up against a lot with the Bayou Parish machine, which I'm starting and continuing to learn more and more about, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it here in Terrebonne. Do you see it that way, that you're going up against the machine? And I guess also, does the machine know that you're going up against them?
Absolutely. It's 100% true. It definitely manifests itself. We just released our financial reports, and I believe my opponent has raised a lot of money. I think his total was like $350,000.
Wow.
And the vast majority of it came from outside of the district, from either special interests in Baton Rouge or government contractors from around the state. And I've definitely had a lot of local parish and city officials come to me and say, Stephen, I support you. I'm going to vote for you, but I cannot publicly endorse you because I fear retribution. And that's a real shame, because people should not fear their legislator. They should definitely not fear anyone in their government. Their government should fear them.
Absolutely.
I think that's. But it does go back to our structural problems. But no, absolutely. The machine knows that we're going up against it. They're putting up their defenses.
Yeah. I'll tell you, Stephen, I think it's interesting that you're saying that the overwhelming majority of the money that your opponent has raised has come from outside special interest groups, obviously not within the parish, not within the district. And that, to me, really is a testament to precisely what's wrong with the system, because our leaders have become increasingly unresponsive to the citizens, to their voters, and therefore most of their money is coming from outside the area where people can even vote for them. I think that's very revealing and very, very telling, as far as what we've been saying all along. Speaking of entrenched interests promulgating a certain agenda and benefiting from it, I want to talk to you for a minute, Stephen, about the lockdown, going back to the 2020 lockdown, when this entire state was shut down, businesses were closing, families breaking up, suicides increasing, people isolated from their loved ones. It was a very, very trying time for our state. We had a number of conservative legislators who tried to stand up to it and came very close to revoking that government emergency declaration. How would you have responded if you had been a legislature during that period of time? And if there is another crackdown on our freedom and liberty by way of some manufactured emergency, how will you respond to it? Speak to our listeners.
Absolutely. I want to kind of follow up on the legislature actually did revoke the governor's authority under the statute that created that authority in the first place. So the authority that gave the governor emergency powers said if the legislature gavels in and says, okay, we're going to take that away, then it's gone. And the court system said, no, that's not constitutional because it only requires one house, not both houses to vote. But if that was unconstitutional, then the whole law should get thrown out. You don't just keep the governor's unfettered emergency powers. So I think that I know that the COVID epidemic was a test of some of the guardrails that we have up for our liberties in our state's constitutional system, and we failed that test. So I think I advocate for a rewrite of our Constitution. A lot of people are scared to outright advocate for that because I think they kind of think, well, I can't advocate for a process I can't control. But we've seen our Constitution fail us time and time again. It was not only written in the 70s in a time that was still entrenched in a very good old boy Louisiana system and the legacy of Huey Long, but it was also interpreted by the courts during the apex of liberal judicial activism. And a lot of people forget that influence, they created a lot of bad precedent right out of the gate that we need to rewrite. And I think that you should never be scared to hand the power over to the people of the state. I know we can't control the Constitutional Convention or what people are going to want to put in there, but at the end of the day, the government needs to derive its power from the people. So the first thing I think is we need to rewrite that Constitution. We need to get it condensed down to a size that is very similar to the U.S. Constitution. And we need to have a strong Bill of Rights that is inviolable. And those rights cannot just be waved away by the governor, even if he is practicing the apex of his police power.
Yeah. I want to gently disagree with you, not in wholly, but only in part. You are right, Stephen, that there was an effort in the courts to revoke the government or to have a judge ratify a revocation of the government's emergency decree. But that did not come until late in 2020. In June and July of 2020, there were conservative legislators who were circulating a petition. And quite frankly, not your opponent, because your opponent has never held office before, but your opponent's father did very, very little, did nothing to help push that through to help reopen our state. But you are right. Later in the year, there was an effort, but there were months and months of suffering, in my opinion, that was needless, that didn't need to happen. If they attempt at this point to try to lock the state down again for any reason, I'm taking it that your response is going to be that you are going to resist that at every turn.
Yes, absolutely. If we can't get the structural problems resolved, then in the meantime, we just have to fight to safeguard our liberties ourselves. And I think it's great that groups like McCag and We the People in Terrebonne and Lafourche and St. Mary, because almost like we said with the scripture earlier, it just takes a small number of people holding the line to make a really big difference and to thwart tyranny. That's the story of America's founding. That's the continued. So I think, democracy dies in the darkness, and that's where the cockroaches come out to play. And so you guys shining a light on these issues and the effect that some of these bad policies has is, I think, the first line of defense.
Yeah. Speaking of shining a light on some of the issues and some of the corruption, Stephen, is there a connection in your view between some of these draconian government policies, lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccines, all of this, and corruption? What is the connection between those two things?
Absolutely. So we know that we have a corruption problem in our state. Sometimes I say the reason we have Latin American economic growth is because we have a Latin American government, in the way that a lot of times there are fiefdoms, there's cronyism, there's nepotism, and there's just outright corruption. And one of the biggest tools that our government has to reward its loyalists and to enrich itself is emergencies. Anytime we have constant emergencies in Louisiana, whether there's hurricanes or the epidemic, but there's always seems to be some occasion for an emergency. And in those times, there's no accountability and very little transparency. And that is one of the things I would like to change. The first day, I want to introduce a bill to bring transparency to all emergencies, because that's where contracts get fetted out. And I don't know for sure what happened during the COVID epidemic, but I know that it's not a process that lends itself to honest dealing from our government.
Yeah, that's so well true. It's amazing how corruption and the erosion of our freedom always begins on the altar of some emergency for which the government is the only solution. So interesting. And our founding fathers were very, very aware of that.
Yeah. And there's that old political quote, never miss an opportunity. What is it about a crisis?
Never waste a crisis.
Never waste a good crisis. Yeah, exactly that.
And that's when the government asks you to give them some of your liberties so that you may have more security.
Exactly.
And when people are afraid, that is when they agree. And the government always knows that. It's definitely you can never trust government officials to limit their own power. Power always corrupts, which is why we need the strongest possible guardrails, and we need the citizens to stay vigilant, and we need sunlight on everything the government does.
Absolutely. And it's high time for citizens to stand up and realize that their hope is in the Lord, their hope and their backs, belong to themselves and to each other, that it's not the government's role to save us from anything.
Not at all. In fact, you're so right, Danielle. The government is not the savior. The government is the problem. And I've never known any time in history when the government has seized or usurped power, supposedly only temporarily, in order to be able to resolve some exigent circumstance or some
for the
emergency.
good of the people.
Yes, and never seen a situation where they voluntarily gave that power back. Ever. That's what people have to understand. Government, once it seizes power, never returns it voluntarily. So we have to be very, very careful in what power we give away to the government. Stephen, let me ask you this more generally. In your race, in your campaign, I know you've had a chance to survey your opponents. I know you have more than one of them. What would you say distinguishes you, your philosophy, your approach from your opponents?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I'm an outsider. I'm not somebody who wants to make a career in politics, a career in government. I believe that the legislature should remain a part-time legislature and that it should be a public service that is done in addition to somebody else's daily life. I do have one opponent who is the son of the incumbent senator who's been there for 12 years, and another opponent who served for 37 years as the chief administrator of my parish. And they will definitely make the argument, look, we know how to work the levers of government. You can trust us. We know the system and we can work the system. And I'm somebody who says, look, the system has not worked for us. If you think that it has, then by all means, you have two great options. If you think that we're on the road to prosperity and that things are getting better. I'm not a doom and gloom person. Look, I still think that this is a great place to live and an amazing community. And it's time that the rest of the country can see that and that we realize our own potential. But in the meantime, I'm the one who's saying this is not desirable. It's not working, and we shouldn't play this game. And so I think that really separates my philosophy. I'm more of a constitutionalist. I'm more of an, I guess, ideologically motivated to make our government better, not to play within the system that exists, just to try to get some of our money back.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's so true. You're Stephen. I want to make sure I understand this correctly because I know Danielle's want to ask you about this. Did I understand you correctly? The combined number of years that your two opponents have, their families at least, working in and for the government that is so dysfunctional is what, 39 years? 40 years?
49, yeah, I think 37 years
50.
for Bo, and then 12 years for the senator. And it's yes, absolutely.
Which direction has our state gone in the last 50 years, up or down?
Yeah, what do we have to show for
and I do not hold the sins of a son against the father, but
No.
The senator's son has not said anything that he would do differently from his father. So I think it should be incumbent on him to say where he would break from those policies, and that has not been forthcoming in any of the forums or debates that we've had so far.
Yeah, well,
very important.
It is, and I agree with you, Stephen. I mean, the system is the problem, and I think rather than work the system, we need to blow the system up and start over again. Maybe that makes me a revolutionary, and maybe that makes me an outlier, but the system is not working. The system is working for the few, not the many, in my view.
It absolutely is. And I'd like to take a moment to get into, when we talk about these structural problems, exactly how that works and why it's different than all of our neighboring states, if I may, for a moment.
Please.
Yeah. So the way that we're really unique is that we're incredibly centralized in a very powerful governor's office and legislature in Baton Rouge. We pay some of the highest, Terrebonne Parish, which is partially within my district, has the highest combined state and local sales tax in the country. We are we're a high tax state, but we're unique in that we send it all off to Baton Rouge, where they make us go on hands and knees and ask for it to come back to our communities.
It's sick.
They've sapped our, we can't raise money for your local parks, your local police, your local fire department, because the state has kind of occupied the field and hoovers up all the tax money for itself. And then they say, oh, but look, we gave you some of it back. Well, it's highly inefficient. That's why our taxes are so high. But it also means that, the governor can demand fealty from the legislators, and then the legislators, because they have the power of the purse, can demand fealty from state and local government officials. Yeah. And in turn, and I think that really, really has a degrading effect on our civil society. Your local parks and your local schools should be accountable to people within your community, your school board and your recreation district, in your water district. They should not be accountable. The legislator on the other side of the state, so someone in Monroe should not be voting on appropriations and where they should go in Terrebonne Parish. They should be voting on what's going on in their own communities. So once you do that, I think we're really seeing the depth of the decline of communal action across our country. Part of it's, that church attendance is way down. But I think another part of it is that everybody pays attention to high level politics, when really, if you want to start engaging with your communities, it should start right there with the people that are in your community.
And what you're describing, Stephen, is basically one of the core principles of federalism that our founding fathers envisioned. The best government is the most local government. The best government is the government that is closest to the people. And the more they are able to regulate their own affairs locally, the more transparent things are, the more accountable the leaders are, and the less opportunity there is for corruption. The idea, it's very, very interesting, the point you make. The idea that, Terrebonne Parish taxpayers, St. Mary, Lafourche, would be sending all of this tax money to Baton Rouge, their money, and then having to do the governor's bidding or to do the bidding of the entrenched power structure in order to be able to get some of that of their own money back to their own district is, as you said, just colossally inefficient, and in our view, really breeds corruption.
And it's completely perverse. It's completely perverse. It makes no sense whatsoever. And, a big part of what this show is about is draining the swamp. And Stephen, you hit the nail on the head when you said people have been looking elsewhere. Look at the state of local politics. You can look right here in Terrebonne Parish. It is filthy. It is absolutely filthy. You could lose your entire car in a pothole in Terrebonne Parish. It's absolutely astounding. And while we have been otherwise engaged, the local officials are just as corrupt, if not more corrupt, than the state officials, than the federal officials. So we do need to get our eye back on the ball locally. And I can't appreciate enough how much you are saying that our tax dollars also need to come back home, but we also have to clean up home so that they don't go into a different other black hole.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important that you have part-time public servants going up there to Baton Rouge, because you're going to need to change this system. First and foremost, you're going to need to get them to see the power of the purse that they have.
Yeah.
And that's why you can't have someone who wants the next job in politics. You can't have somebody who wants to make a career out of it, because those kind of people will never give up that power of the purse that they hold.
You're so right. Now, listen, Stephen, you have really hit on some issues that obviously light a fire under me and under Chris. These are issues that we care about deeply. What are you hearing from voters that's important to them, and what do you hope to address in the Senate? You mentioned obviously these big structural issues. Are there other issues that are coming up with your voters that maybe you haven't touched on yet?
Absolutely. Look, I'm a very policy and solutions oriented person. Like I said, I got my undergraduate degree in public policy. So there are a lot of more, when I say we do have a lot of those little specifics to work on, I do have plans for all of those as well. In fact, I'm the only candidate in my race, and I'd probably be the only candidate in a lot of races with an actual published plan to address the homeowners insurance crisis.
Wow.
If you look, and everybody has the same pollsters, every poll that's running in the state is asking the voters what their biggest issue is, and it's coming up homeowners insurance. So for every politician, you're going to see something on their website or something in their ads where they say they want to tackle the homeowners insurance crisis. Well, you have to ask, if you're a voter, I ask that everybody ask the people running for office, okay, but be specific. What are you going to do? And if you're talking to an incumbent or an insider, ask, why now? Why didn't you do anything about it 2 years ago when everyone knew this crisis was coming and the insurance companies were saying, hey, look, we're losing money. We're going to be going way up on rates. They didn't do nothing in the legislature. They voted to give $45 million of taxpayer money to insurance companies in the hopes that it would help. But first of all, that's a lot of money for taxpayers, and then it didn't help. So I think the first thing we have to do, and I believe we're going to probably have a special session after the election, is to tackle that homeowners insurance crisis. For that, I do have some, I think, unique ideas.
Stephen, can I ask you about that just to drill down for a minute? And I may be ignorant on this point, but in my view, it seems like we, the insurance holders and taxpayers, have ceded the cost determination of our insurance rates to the federal government, with the levy boards kind of in cahoots with that, or trying to fight that depending on the parish and the levy district you're in. Is that an accurate representation of what's happening?
Well, in the flood insurance is definitely an issue where the federal government won't even tell us what's in those calculations, even as it sets rates for all the payers nationwide. So I do think we need to fully, whatever funds that the AG's office needs, and whoever wins the election for AG needs to continue to go after them and just seek transparency. How can you set prices and not tell us what goes into it? That's absolutely insane, and there must be something in there that's unsavory, or else they would have told us by now.
Yeah.
I think they like to say, "Oh no, it's very complicated." Well, that's okay. We can handle complicated. But when it comes to the homeowners insurance crisis, it's really been a lack of preparedness for hurricanes. We have to be ready for the next storm before it comes, because that's just what's driving the claims up. Besides the litigious problems that we have in our state.
Yeah, we have to be prepared for any problem before it arrives. One of the big criticisms that Danielle and I have had with regard to politics in Louisiana generally, and the way it works in our legislature very often, is that they're so reactionary. They're so reactive. There is so very little foresight. The inability to ever be preemptive in legislation, to anticipate a problem and to enact legislation to address a problem even before it arrives, because it's coming. Our politics is so reactionary. And your point about being prepared for things before they arrive, being able to anticipate problems and deal with them beforehand, before they become a major crisis, I'm really impressed that you have that insight in order to be able to do that.
Yeah, and my perspective is maybe a little bit more on the cynical side of that, but I think that it's on purpose that people are not preemptive, that they, that legislators and other policymakers are not preemptive. They're reactive because they know that they'll have this fantastic crisis that they can take advantage of.
God, that's Danielle, and we've always said that. You've always said that. My approach has always probably been a bit more naive than yours, because you believe that some of this is actually intentional because of the people who actually benefit from the dysfunction.
Yeah, they also never seem to anticipate the law. The law of government intervention is the law of unintended consequences. You have to think about what's the net. If we pass a law, we have to think about what behavior it incentivizes, and the people that actually live in the state have to follow these rules. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot that they don't get right, and that's why I was motivated to throw my hat in the ring.
I love it. Well, while we have you, you've mentioned obviously that you work in the energy field. What can you do at the state legislature to help revive that at the state level? You mentioned the federal level already, but what can we do at the local level to get the industry thriving again?
Well, I think we've had a good step that benefited a lot of the ratepayers over here in the Houma area. Was something called the 1803 Collective, and really what it does is it just plugs us it plugs some of our rural co-ops into the market. The federal marketplace for power. We need to make market-oriented changes to our transmission and to our power generation. I think just to get the cost down. We have a low average cost per kilowatt hour in this state, but we use a lot of power, especially when the summer is hot like this. So it's very critical to keep our rates down. And look, I'm an offshore construction contractor. That's my trade. So a lot of people in our industry are looking forward to the prospect of offshore wind, which if it's affordable and if it works for Louisiana ratepayers, I do not oppose. However, we've seen with the turbines that are established off of New York, it's roughly the power that they are producing comes at a cost of roughly 10 times what our rates are in Louisiana.
Wow.
So what that means is if we wanted to get 10% of Louisiana's power from offshore wind at those costs, everyone's power bill would double. We cannot pursue, that is not currently viable. We cannot subsidize or ask our ratepayers to pony up for a cost driving boondoggle. Even if I would personally benefit, I could not do that to the Louisiana ratepayer.
Yeah, and you mentioned that we had a discussion about this, Stephen, at the LA GOP convention, and you basically said just that. Even if you maybe personally would benefit from it, it's not something you could go along with because ultimately it's not efficient. None of this, these windmills, the carbon capture sequestration, none of this was properly vetted in the legislature. Nobody asked any tough questions, serious questions. And I'm assuming if you had been there, you would have asked a lot of tough questions about some of this windmill legislation before it was passed, including the issue that you just brought up, because believe me, there was not a whole lot of vetting going on in there during the legislation on those particular issues. So that's a reason why we need you.
And one of the most ridiculous things about what you just said, Stephen, is that at least New York is not sitting on top of oil fields. New York, okay, if they have to pay 10 times more than we would pay for transmission, that's one thing because they're not an oil state. But are we going to put these things in the Gulf where the oil is and still pay 10 times more? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, New York sometimes doesn't face a choice because they banned pipelines, right? So they they don't have any gas over there to generate power like we have. The Magnolia, like I said, 1803 Cooperative is also building a brand new combined cycle gas plant that should lower rates in the rural co-ops like Sleeka, which we have here in Terrible Parish, by 15%.
Wow.
And we already are lower than the monopolies in the area. So you unlock the power of the markets and you let the consumer go find the lowest rate. And trust me, people will be motivated to shop around for their power because the bills are just too high this summer.
Exactly.
Yeah. There are so many things that the market, if allowed to operate in an unfettered way, would solve. So many of these problems. One of the thoughts that I've had several times during your conversation here with us, Stephen, is that you really seem to represent, and your campaign and your philosophy seems to represent a real departure, really, from old style machine dynastic politics and a return to real citizen representation. And it's refreshing to hear.
I think that, and I do really appreciate that. And I think when I go and talk to the voters, I think they are also getting a sense that they're finally fed up with it. Voters old and young, they're starting to realize that we need a more egalitarian system. I think people used to just accept that this was something that they could never change. They would say, well, of course the parish president's brother-in-law got a good contract. Why else do you run for parish president? It was something somebody actually told me one time. And but I think that's really starting to change. And it starts with the people who, they're in a district like mine. Sure, when you start running, you want to go talk to your parish councilmen and police jurors and aldermen and everybody else who is sort of a political insider. But there's 65,000 registered voters in the district. And I would say maybe 200 of them are political insiders. So the power of the voter is immense compared to the power of the political insiders when the voter decides enough is enough.
So well said.
Absolutely. And they don't want us to know it. The entrenched bureaucrats do not want the voters to really know the real power that we have.
They don't. And Stephen, we know that you're getting noticed, and we're really excited about that. We heard that you trounced one of your opponents, the one who showed up for the debate that We the People Bayou community held earlier this week. And you've picked up some pretty important endorsements as well. Who's given you the nod so far?
Absolutely. So I'm endorsed by the Louisiana Freedom Caucus. I believe they are looking for, after the tragedy we had with running the budget out of control this past year, I believe they're looking for fiscally conservative representatives and senators across the state. They're trying to endorse in those races. So I'm happy to have their endorsement. I've been endorsed by Louisiana Right to Life. I've been endorsed by Louisiana Stand for Children, which advocates for children in the education system. And that's just the ones I could think off the top of my head for now. We've definitely had some, the Terrebonne Parish, RPEC, I believe, is dually endorsing me and one of my opponents. So we've gotten some good traction, and I think the voters are starting to hear the message right at the right time.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. And obviously you're on this show, so you know that we support you and we endorse you, and we're going to do everything in our power to help you out to get across the finish line.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that.
And Stephen, it's interesting you mentioned the pro-life endorsement. The vast majority of our listeners and the CAG members are staunchly pro-life, and I'm sure we'll be glad to hear that you received the official endorsement of the Louisiana Right to Life Association. Very, very good group of people, have done so much to fight for the unborn for so long, and we're a big part of the reason why. Because they continued to fight, a big part of the reason why we got the revolutionary abortion decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't have any doubt in my mind about it. And so we're very, very thrilled to hear that that's your position. You got that endorsement. How can people get in touch with you, Stephen? What's the best way to donate and to support you in your campaign?
Absolutely. Well, with the out-migration crisis that has become a big theme of the campaign, my website is actually backtothebayou.com.
I love it.
I like it.
Bayou.com. It redirects to StephenSwiber.com, but it's a lot easier to remember and spell, backtothebayou.com, where you could go read my platform. There's some photos of me up there with my wife, who makes the entire thing look better. and it's we have a donate page on there. You can request a sign. You can request a volunteer. We'd love to have everybody on board.
Well, keep working hard out there. There's a lot of people behind you, and fight hard. We are now what? We're what?
Less than a month.
Less than a month out, 24, 25 days. I know you will use your time wisely, and as Rudyard Kipling would say, you will fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, every one of them. God bless you, Stephen. Thank you for coming on. Keep us in the loop, and we support you 100%.
But thank you, Chris and Danielle. It means a whole lot to me.
We'll talk to you
Take care.
soon, Stephen. You take care. Good luck out there.
Thank you.
Chris, when I said he's a breath of fresh air, I mean it 100%.
It's amazing to me that someone so young, and he is very young, well, I guess would have packed that much experience in his background for being so young. He's done so many things. But what I'm most impressed by is the fact that someone so young would have the backbone and the courage to speak truth to power, which is exactly what he's doing. He is speaking truth in very unvarnished, unapologetic terms to a very entrenched power structure down in the bayou. And I just am so amazed and inspired by that.
Yeah, and intelligently, right? I mean, he's clearly been following the issues. He knows the issues. Obviously, he is far more expert in some of these issues, like the insurance issue and the energy issue, than I am. And it's just so great to see that someone who understands the issues, who's paid attention to the legislature, who's watched and has been inspired to run because of the garbage that he's seen, is standing up, is speaking up, and is running.
Yeah, someone who obviously, as you said, has a deep, not just a superficial knowledge, but a deep understanding of the critical issues, and also the backbone to challenge the machine. And I am just very inspired by that. We need to continue to pray for Stephen and continue to support him in every way that we can. One of the ways that we can support him, obviously, people can donate directly to Stephen's campaign, but there are some things that we, through our LeCag PAC, can do for Stephen and other constitutional conservative candidates that we have been doing. So I want to encourage all of our listeners to continue to donate to LeCag, LACAG.org, or you can mail us a donation, P.O. Box 64952, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 70896, so that we can continue to provide the resources that these very good candidates need to get their message out and to win these important elections. Because if they don't, Danielle, we do not return our legislature to the people. And if they do win, then we do return the legislature to the people. And that's what's at stake. Very, very fundamental level.
You're so right. I mean, this, of course, everyone says this is the most critical election of our lifetime, but I really do believe that we're at a point, I mean, maybe the point of no return is sounds a little parabolic, but if things continue to go in this direction that we're going with basically the mob, the good old boy network, the corruption ruling the direction of the state and draining the life out of people, people aren't going to stick around.
They're not going to stick around.
And they're already not sticking around.
They're already not sticking around. And there will come a point where, I think it was W.B. Yeats who said, there just comes a point when the center can no longer hold and anarchy descends upon the world. And that's what we are trying to avoid, but the signs of it are everywhere. It's not too late to reverse it. It's not too late to reclaim our government for the citizens, but we have to have the support of our listeners, and we have to have the ability to do what we need to do to put good constitutional legislators in office. And this is one, Stephen Swiber, who is challenging the machine that wants to continue to do things the same old way, continue to enrich themselves and their friends, and continue to perpetuate a government that is clearly dysfunctional and not responsive to the citizens. So we need your help. We know we can count on your help, and we thank you for the help that you have already provided in donating to LeCag. And of course, Danielle, the State of Freedom.
Yes, indeed. And just as a reminder, if people are interested in supporting the State of Freedom, you can do that at freedomstate.us. Chris, as you and I have been saying, it is indeed time for a new day to dawn in the Louisiana swamp.
It is, and it is dawning. The sun is slowly rising over the horizon, and we have every reason to be hopeful. Many positive things are happening, and with the continued support of our listeners and the engagement of citizens across Louisiana, each day we will take another step to preserve the state of freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. I'm here for it.
Amen.
Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to The State of Freedom, LLC at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.